Have you ever felt like your life suddenly went quiet, almost as if the universe hit pause without asking your permission? You wake up one morning and something feels different. Not wrong, exactly, but shifted. Like you've been living on autopilot for so long that when the engine finally cuts off, the silence is almost deafening. If you've experienced this strange, unexplainable heaviness mixed with an odd sense of anticipation, then what I'm about to share with you might just change everything you thought you knew about personal transformation. The truth is, most people mistake these moments for depression, burnout, or simply having a bad week. They push through, distract themselves, wait for motivation to magically reappear. But what if I told you that these quiet periods, these uncomfortable pauses in your life, aren't signs of failure at all? What if they're actually the universe's way of recalibrating your frequency, fine-tuning you for something far greater than you've been settling for? But before we begin, please hit the like button and let me know where in the world you're watching from today. It's always fascinating seeing who's joining us from around the world. And if you haven't already, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any of our future videos. Now, here's what most self-help content won't tell you. Transformation doesn't announce itself with fireworks and sudden clarity. It whispers. It arrives in strange mood shifts you can't explain, in an unexpected fatigue that sleep doesn't cure, in the way conversations that once energized you now feel hollow. Has this ever happened to you? That feeling where you're going through all the motions of your life, but something fundamental has shifted beneath the surface. This isn't coincidence. This is recalibration. And the reason you're watching this video right now, out of millions of possibilities on this platform, is because some part of you already knows you're in the middle of it. Your frequency is changing, whether you're conscious of it or not. The question is, will you resist it, misunderstand it, and stay stuck? Or will you learn to recognize these signs for what they truly are? Invitations to step into a version of yourself you've been unconsciously preparing for. What you're about to discover might surprise you, because we're not going to talk about manifesting vision boards or positive affirmations. We're going to talk about something far more practical and powerful: how to recognize when your internal operating system is upgrading, and how to work with that process instead of against it. Stay with me until the end, because the difference between people who transform and people who stay stuck isn't talent, luck, or circumstances. It's simply knowing how to read the signals their own life is sending them. Right now, in this very moment, your body might be telling you something your mind has been too busy to hear. There's a reason certain things that used to satisfy you now feel empty. There's a reason you're more tired than usual, more irritable, more sensitive to inauthenticity. There's a reason why you suddenly can't tolerate the same conversations, the same routines, the same versions of relationships that used to work just fine. Your system is tuning itself, and what you're experiencing isn't a breakdown, it's a breakthrough disguised as a pause. Think about a guitar string for a moment. When a musician tunes an instrument, they're not breaking it or fixing something that's damaged. They're adjusting the tension to find that precise point where the string can vibrate at its truest frequency. Too loose, and the sound is dull, lifeless. Too tight, and it's shrill, unstable, ready to snap. But right in that sweet spot, that's where the music lives. That's where resonance happens. And right now, whether you realize it or not, you're being tuned. The problem is that most people panic when they feel this adjustment happening. They interpret the pause as failure. They look at their sudden lack of motivation and think something's wrong with them. They notice how quickly they get exhausted by things that never bothered them before and assume they're becoming weak or worse, depressed. But here's the hidden truth that changes everything. What's falling away first isn't your strength. It's the facade. It's the effort you've been using to sustain things that were never aligned with your authentic frequency in the first place. Have you noticed how certain conversations now drain you completely, even with people you care about? How you can sleep for 8 hours and wake up feeling like you've been running marathons in your dreams? That's not random. That's not just stress or age or bad luck. That sensation of having walked inside yourself all night. That's real. That's your consciousness doing deep work while your mind rests. You're literally reorganizing your internal architecture, and that takes energy, massive amounts of energy. If you're ready to keep exploring these ideas with people who understand that transformation is a practice, not a performance, subscribe to this channel. This is where we continue the conversation that most places won't have. Now, I want to go even deeper into this because understanding the mechanics of this process is what separates people who navigate it successfully from those who fight it and end up more stuck than before. When your energy drops without clear reason, your first instinct is probably to push harder, to force yourself back into productivity, to muscle through it. But that's like tensing the guitar string even more when it's already out of tune. You're not solving the problem, you're making the dissonance worse. What most people don't understand about transformation is that it operates on a completely different timeline than our conscious mind expects. We live in a culture that worships speed, instant results, overnight success stories. So when your internal system says pause, recalibrate, integrate, your conscious mind interprets that as falling behind. Your ego starts panicking because productivity has stopped, because you're not checking boxes, because from the outside it might look like nothing is happening. But that's the deception. Everything is happening. It's just happening beneath the surface, in the hidden layers where real change actually occurs. The pause isn't punishing you. The pause is protecting you. It's preventing you from continuing to build a life on a foundation that was never truly yours. Think about all the things you've been maintaining through sheer willpower. Relationships you've outgrown but feel obligated to keep. Careers you've invested too much in to walk away from. Versions of yourself you've been performing for so long you forgot they were performances. What falls first isn't what matters most. What falls first is what was being held together by effort rather than truth. This is the turning point where most people either wake up or go back to sleep. They either recognize this pause as sacred, as necessary, as the exact thing they've been unconsciously asking for, or they medicate it, distract themselves from it, and wonder years later why they feel so far from themselves. The choice isn't really about what you do next. It's about how you interpret what's happening right now, in this moment, in your actual lived experience. If you're feeling this resonance, if something in what I'm saying is landing differently than the typical self-help advice you've heard before, write in the comments, "I'm in the pause." Let me know you're here, that you're recognizing this moment for what it really is. Here's something that will probably shift your entire approach to this recalibration process. Your body already knows what's happening. It knew before your mind started questioning, before you began looking for answers, before you clicked on this video. The physical signals have been there all along, speaking a language you may have forgotten how to interpret. That knot in your chest that shows up out of nowhere. That's not anxiety in the clinical sense, it's information. That when you're about to say yes to something you should decline. That's wisdom, not weakness. The tension that creeps into your jaw during certain conversations. The way your shoulders climb toward your ears when you're around specific people or situations. These aren't random physiological quirks. They're your internal guidance system trying to get your attention the only way it knows how. Your mind, meanwhile, is scrambling for explanations. It wants logic, reasons, a clear narrative it can understand and control. It wants to know exactly why you feel this way, what caused it, how to fix it, and when it will end. But your body doesn't operate on that timeline or that language. Your body speaks in sensations, in whispers of discomfort, in sudden sighs that escape without your permission. And the frustrating truth is that your body is usually right about these things long before your mind catches up. Think about the last time you made a decision that looked perfect on paper but felt wrong in your gut. Maybe it was a job opportunity with great benefits, or a relationship that checked all the logical boxes, or a commitment that seemed like the responsible choice. Your mind built the case, laid out all the rational arguments, convinced you it made sense, but somewhere deep in your system something contracted, something whispered no. And if you're honest with yourself, you probably knew the outcome before it even unfolded, didn't you? You knew because your body told you, even if your mind refused to listen. This is where most people get stuck in the recalibration process. They feel the shift happening, they notice all these signals, and then they panic into one of two extremes. The first group rushes to fill the space with noise. They sign up for every course, read every book, start 10 new projects, completely reorganize their lives, make dramatic declarations on social media about their transformation. It's agitation disguised as action. It's the mind trying to regain control by doing, anything to avoid actually being present with the discomfort of not knowing. The second group does the opposite. They freeze. They feel the signals and interpret them as danger. So they become immobile. They wait for absolute certainty before taking even the smallest step. They tell themselves they're being thoughtful, strategic, careful, but really they're paralyzed by the fear of making the wrong move. So they make no move at all, and the stagnation becomes its own kind of suffering. Neither approach works, because neither is actually tuned to what's really being asked of you. Real transformation doesn't happen through frantic activity or complete stillness. It happens through coherent action, small, clean, deliberate moves that align with what your body is actually telling you. Not what your mind thinks you should do, not what looks impressive from the outside, but what genuinely resonates as true when you get quiet enough to feel it. Coherence is the key word here, and it's vastly different from what most people think of as productivity or progress. Coherent action might look like finally having that difficult conversation you've been avoiding. It might look like saying no to something everyone expects you to say yes to. It might look like doing absolutely nothing for a day because your system genuinely needs rest, not because you're procrastinating. The defining characteristic is that it matches your internal truth rather than contradicting it. This is the hidden mechanism behind why some people seem to transform effortlessly while others struggle for years. It's not that the first group has more willpower or better circumstances. It's that they've learned to distinguish between the noise of agitation and the clarity of coherent movement. They've learned to trust the body's signals even when the mind hasn't fully understood them yet. They've learned that presence, genuine, uncomfortable, raw presence with what actually is, creates the conditions for authentic change in ways that forcing never can. If this distinction between agitation and coherence is clicking for you, if you're starting to recognize which camp you've been operating from, drop a comment saying coherence over chaos. Let's build some momentum here with people who are actually ready to do this differently. Now let me show you the simplest yet most powerful tool you have access to right now, in this exact moment, regardless of where you are or what's happening around you. I want you to actually do this with me, not just intellectually understand it. Bring your attention to the air moving through your nostrils. Don't change it. Don't make it deeper or slower. Just notice it. Feel the temperature difference between the inhale and the exhale. Notice how your chest expands slightly, how your abdomen moves in response. That's it. Nothing fancy, nothing spiritual, just pure awareness of something that's been happening automatically since the moment you were born. What just happened in those few seconds? You stepped out of autopilot. You exited the stream of thoughts about the past and worries about the future and landed fully in the present moment. And here's what most people miss. That shift, that seemingly simple act of conscious breathing, is the foundation of all genuine transformation. Not because breathing is magical, but because it's the doorway out of the mechanical existence most people mistake for living. Autopilot serves a purpose. It's how you drive home without consciously thinking about every turn, how you brush your teeth without an instruction manual, how your heart keeps beating while you sleep. Your nervous system is designed to automate repetitive tasks so your conscious mind can focus on novelty and problem solving. That's brilliant engineering. The problem arises when autopilot stops being a tool and becomes your entire operating system. Think about your average day. How much of it do you actually remember, not because you have memory problems, but because you weren't really there? You were thinking about your next meeting during breakfast. You were rehearsing an argument during your commute. You were scrolling through your phone while someone was talking to you. Your body was present, going through all the motions, but you, the conscious, aware version of you, was somewhere else entirely. And when you live like that for months, years, decades, something terrifying happens. You become a ghost in your own life. This is the brutal truth behind why so many people feel stuck even when they're constantly busy, even when they're checking off goals, even when from the outside it looks like they're making progress. They're running an outdated program. They're living as the person they were 5 years ago, making decisions based on fears and beliefs they adopted even longer ago, following scripts they don't remember writing. And the version of yourself that's trying to emerge, the one aligned with your current frequency, can't install itself into a system that's perpetually unconscious. If something here landed differently than the usual content you consume, hit the like button. It's a small signal that helps this reach others who are searching for this exact conversation. Your future self needs an awake host. It needs you to be present enough to notice when old patterns are running, aware enough to make different choices in real time, conscious enough to feel the difference between authentic movement and mechanical repetition. And that awakening doesn't happen through some grand enlightenment experience. It happens through moments, lots of them, small moments where you catch yourself, where you come back to your breath, where you choose presence over automaticity. The recalibration process you're going through right now is trying to wake you up, but it can only work if you're willing to stop sleepwalking. Every time you feel that knot in your chest and you actually pause to acknowledge it instead of pushing through, that's you waking up. Every time you notice you're about to say yes out of habit and you stop yourself, that's you waking up. Every time you bring your attention back to your actual physical experience instead of the stories in your head, that's you creating space for something new to emerge. This is why some people can read every self-help book, attend every workshop, know all the concepts, and still never actually change. They're trying to upgrade their software while remaining unconscious, and it simply doesn't work that way. The insights don't integrate, the practices don't stick, the transformation doesn't land because there's no one home to receive it. They're still operating on autopilot, just with fancier language and more sophisticated justifications. But here's what's available to you when you start breaking that pattern, when you practice coming back to the present moment again and again. You begin to see your life with fresh eyes. Relationships you thought were fine reveal themselves as draining. Work you tolerated becomes unbearable. Habits you never questioned suddenly seem absurd. This isn't pessimism, this is clarity. And clarity, real clarity, is always the precursor to authentic change. If you've recognized yourself in this description, if you're seeing how much of your life has been running on autopilot, write in the comments, "I'm waking up." This matters more than you think. There's a story about a master luthier that perfectly illustrates what's really happening during this recalibration phase. A professional musician brought in a violin that looked absolutely flawless. Beautiful craftsmanship, pristine condition, everything appeared perfect. but the instrument kept drifting out of tune, not dramatically, not in an obvious way, just slightly off, enough that the musician could feel it, even if audiences couldn't always hear it, enough that playing it had become exhausting in a way he couldn't quite explain. The luthier examined the violin carefully, running his hands over every surface, listening to each string. He didn't find anything obviously wrong. No cracks, no loose parts, no visible damage. And then he did something so subtle that the musician almost missed it. He turned one of the tuning pegs by the smallest fraction of a degree, a movement so minimal it was barely perceptible. He played a note, listened, made another microscopic adjustment, and suddenly the instrument sang. The resistance disappeared. The musician's eyes widened because he could immediately feel the difference, even though he couldn't see what had changed. The luthier explained it perfectly. The violin wasn't broken, it was barely off, and what's barely off is what exhausts you most, because it forces you to compensate constantly without you even realizing you're doing it. This is the revelation that changes everything about how you understand your current experience. You're not falling apart, you're not broken, you're not failing at life, you're just slightly out of tune. And that slight misalignment has been draining your energy in ways you've been attributing to everything else. Think about how this plays out in your actual life. Maybe you're in a relationship that looks fine from the outside, that you can rationally justify staying in, but something is just barely off. Not abusive, not toxic, just not quite right. And you compensate. You adjust your behavior, you manage your expectations, you convince yourself it's normal, you put in extra effort to make it work. And it does work, technically, but it's exhausting you in a way that a genuinely aligned relationship never would. Or consider your career. Maybe you're good at your job, maybe it pays well, maybe it even aligns with your skills on paper, but there's this persistent sense that something isn't clicking. Not enough to quit, not enough to complain about loudly, just enough to make every day feel slightly harder than it should. So you compensate. You drink more coffee, you work longer hours, you tell yourself everyone feels this way, you push through the resistance. And technically, you succeed. But you're burning energy at twice the rate you would if you were properly aligned. This is what life is trying to adjust during these pause moments. Not your entire existence, not your whole identity, not everything at once, just the tuning peg. The one small thing that's creating the constant need for compensation. And here's what makes this so challenging. Your mind wants to find the big, obvious problem. It wants a dramatic diagnosis, a clear enemy, something concrete to fix or fight against. But the actual issue is usually something much more subtle. A boundary you're not setting, a truth you're not speaking, a desire you're not honoring, a pattern you're repeating unconsciously. The exhaustion you've been feeling isn't from working too hard or having too much on your plate, though those might be symptoms. The deep fatigue comes from the constant internal compensation, from trying to make something work that's fundamentally misaligned. Your system knows this. That's why it's forcing a pause. It's trying to give you the space to notice where you're barely off, so you can make the minimal adjustment that will change everything. And here's the beautiful part. The adjustment itself is usually smaller than you think. Not a complete life overhaul, not burning everything down, not dramatic declarations or radical changes. Just a slight turn of the tuning peg. One honest conversation. One boundary finally set. One decision you've been avoiding. One pattern you stop repeating. One truth you finally speak out loud. The impact is enormous, but the actual action is often incredibly simple. This is why most transformation advice fails people. It tells you to completely reinvent yourself, to hustle harder, to make massive changes. But what if you don't need to add more? What if you just need to adjust what's already there by that one crucial degree? If this is resonating with you, if you're starting to identify where you might be barely off, put in the comments, "I see the Adjustment. Let's acknowledge what's becoming visible. So here's the question that will probably make you uncomfortable, and that discomfort is exactly how you know it's the right question to ask. What part of your life sounds acceptable but isn't actually true? Not what's obviously wrong, not what you already complain about, not what everyone can see needs fixing. I'm talking about the things that look fine on the surface, that you can defend logically, that you've convinced yourself are good. Enough, but deep down, in that place you usually avoid examining, you know aren't aligned with who you're becoming. Don't answer immediately. This is important. If you answer too quickly, you're going to get the rehearsed response. The one your social self has already prepared, the acceptable answer that protects you from actually having to change anything. That's your character responding, the version of you that's been performing for others, managing impressions, maintaining the narrative. But that's not what we're after here. We need your essence to respond, and your essence speaks much more slowly than your character does. Take a breath. Actually feel into your body right now. Where is there tension? Where do you feel that subtle contraction when you scan through the different areas of your life? Your career that you defend to everyone but secretly resent. The relationship you stay in because it makes logical sense even though it doesn't feed your soul. The city you live in because you always have, not because you actually want to be there. The version of success you're chasing because it impresses people, not because it genuinely lights you up. This is where most people get stuck in permanent recalibration mode. They recognize something needs to shift. They feel all the signals. They go through the pause. But they never ask themselves this crucial question. Instead, they try to convince themselves into a new frequency. They consume content. They learn concepts. They intellectually understand transformation, and they think that understanding is the same as changing. It's not. Your frequency doesn't shift because you watched the right videos or read the right books or understood the right principles. It shifts when you actually sustain a different way of being, and sustaining something requires you to first be honest about what you're currently sustaining that needs to stop. You can't add a new frequency on top of an old one and expect harmony. You have to make space first, and making space means acknowledging what's taking up room that shouldn't be. The practice of transformation isn't spectacular. That's what the self-help industry won't tell you because spectacular sells and humble doesn't. But the real work, the work that actually creates lasting change, is humble by nature. It's not something you post about. It's not something that gets likes and comments and external validation. It's the quiet, repeated choice to honor what's true over what's acceptable, even when no one is watching, even when there's no immediate payoff, even when it would be easier to just keep pretending. Sustaining yourself means showing up to that truth consistently, not just when you're motivated or inspired or feeling strong. It means making the aligned choice on the hard days, the boring days, the days when nothing feels special or significant. It means building a practice that isn't dependent on mood or circumstance or external reinforcement. And that kind of practice doesn't seek applause, it seeks stability. It's not trying to prove anything to anyone. It's simply creating a foundation solid enough to support the version of you that's trying to emerge. This is the hidden mechanism behind why some people transform quickly while others stay stuck for years. It's not talent, intelligence, or resources. It's the willingness to be ruthlessly honest about what's acceptable but not true, followed by the discipline to sustain a different choice until it becomes your new normal. Most people skip the first part because it's uncomfortable, and they abandon the second part because it's not glamorous. But both are absolutely essential. The recalibration you're experiencing right now is creating the conditions for this kind of honesty. The pause, the exhaustion, the sudden inability to tolerate what used to be fine, all of it is designed to surface what's been hiding under the label of acceptable. And once you see it, once you really let yourself acknowledge it, you can't unsee it. That's when the real journey begins. If you're ready to stop defending what's merely acceptable and start building what's actually true, write in the comments, truth over acceptable. This is where commitment starts. Now let me tell you about the lie that keeps more people stuck than almost anything else. The belief that you need to feel motivated before you can take action. You've probably experienced this yourself. You're waiting to feel ready, waiting for that surge of inspiration, that moment of clarity when everything aligns and you finally feel compelled to move. And while you're waiting, days turn into weeks, weeks turn into months, and you're still in the exact same place, still waiting for motivation to arrive like some kind of emotional cavalry coming to save you. But here's what actually happens in the real mechanics of change. Motivation doesn't precede action. Motivation follows it. Think about that for a second, because it completely inverts how most people approach their lives. You don't wait until you feel like going to the gym. You go to the gym, and then halfway through the workout, the energy shows up. You don't wait until you feel inspired to create. You start creating, and inspiration finds you in the process. You don't wait until you feel confident to have the difficult conversation. You have the conversation, and confidence builds as you realize you survived it. The energy you're waiting for, the motivation you think needs to appear before you can begin, is actually trapped on the other side of the action. It can't reach you while you're sitting still. It's like standing in a dark room, waiting for it to feel bright before you flip the switch. The room doesn't warm up to the idea of light. The light doesn't appear because the room is ready. You flip the switch, and then there's light. It's mechanical, not magical. And the same principle applies to your transformation. Every time you make a coherent gesture, meaning an action that's aligned with your truth rather than your habits, energy organizes around it. Not always immediately, not always dramatically, but consistently. Your system recognizes when you're moving in integrity, and it rewards that movement with more energy to continue. But it won't release that energy preemptively. You have to demonstrate through action that you're actually serious this time, that this isn't just another mental fantasy you're entertaining while continuing to live exactly as you always have. This is why the most powerful thing you can do right now isn't to make a massive plan or set enormous goals or commit to overhauling your entire existence. The most powerful thing you can do is choose one thing, one single action that you're going to do today that demonstrates respect for this new frequency you're tuning into. Not 10 things, not a complete routine. One thing, and the smaller and more doable it is, the better, because we're not trying to impress anyone. We're trying to create evidence for your nervous system that change is actually happening. But here's the crucial part that most people miss. This action has to be done with your body, not just contemplated with your mind. You can't think your way into a new frequency. You can't visualize your way into transformation. You have to physically move differently, choose differently, act differently. If you choose to drink water with attention, that means you actually pause. You feel the glass. In your hand, you notice the temperature. You experience the swallowing. It's not just hydration, it's a practice of presence. If you choose to organize a space, you do it with calm, not rushing through it to check it off a list. You're not trying to finish, you're trying to be present with the action itself, because what you're really doing here isn't cleaning or drinking or whatever the surface action is. What you're really doing is training your system to operate from a different state of consciousness. You're building the muscle of intentionality. You're teaching yourself that you can choose coherence over automaticity, that you can be awake in your own life instead of sleepwalking through it. This is the daily switch. This is the small gesture that seems insignificant but actually rewires everything over time. Because when you prove to yourself, not through affirmations or beliefs, but through actual physical evidence, that you can do one thing with full presence, you create a template. And that template can expand, but expansion only happens after you've established the foundation, and the foundation is always simpler than people want it to be. If you're willing to commit to one intentional action today, not tomorrow, not when you feel more ready, but today, write in the comments what that action is. Just name it. Make it real by putting it into words. Now here's what's going to happen when you actually commit to that one intentional action. Resistance will show up. Not maybe, not sometimes. It will absolutely appear. And most people interpret resistance times. It will absolutely appear. And most people interpret resistance as a sign they're doing something wrong, as evidence that they should stop, as their intuition warning them away. But that's a fundamental misunderstanding of what resistance actually is. Resistance is an ancient guardian. It's been with you your entire life, and its job is to keep you safe by keeping you the same. Every time you attempt to move beyond familiar patterns, resistance activates, because from its perspective, familiar equals safe, even when familiar is actually destroying you. It doesn't care about your happiness, or your growth, or your potential. It cares about survival. And survival to the primitive parts of your brain means not changing anything that hasn't already killed you. So when you feel that heavy sensation, that inner voice saying, "Not today," or "This doesn't matter," or "You're being ridiculous," that's not weakness. That's not lack of discipline. That's resistance doing exactly what it's designed to do. And here's the shift that changes everything. Instead of fighting it as an enemy, treating it as something to power through or overcome with sheer willpower, what if you observed it as energy? What if you got curious about it? Ask the resistance directly, "What are you protecting me from seeing right now?" And then, actually, listen. Don't rush to dismiss it. Don't immediately argue with it. Just let it speak. Sometimes resistance is protecting your comfort. It knows that if you take this action, your entire life might have to reorganize around this new truth, and that's terrifying. Sometimes it's protecting your fear of being seen, of being judged, of discovering you're capable and therefore no longer have the excuse of limitation. Sometimes it's protecting old stories about who you are that would have to die if you actually changed. The resistance itself holds information about where you're stuck and why. When you treat it as an enemy to be defeated, you miss that information and you end up in an exhausting internal war that drains the exact energy you need for transformation. But when you treat it as energy to be understood, something remarkable happens. The resistance often softens. Not because you convinced it to go away, but because you acknowledged what it was trying to protect. And in that acknowledgement, you can make a conscious choice. I hear you, I understand the fear, and I'm moving forward anyway. This brings us to one of the most reliable signs that your frequency is actually changing, not just theoretically, but in your lived experience. You'll notice a shift in what you value. Things that used to seem boring, quiet evenings, simple routines, uninterrupted conversations, will start feeling peaceful. Activities that used to seem slow or insufficient, walking without a podcast, eating without scrolling, sitting without entertainment, will start feeling true, like they're actually nourishing you in a way that constant stimulation never did. This transition is profound because our entire culture is designed to make you believe that more is better, that busy equals important, that stimulation equals aliveness. We're taught to pack our schedules, maximize our productivity, optimize every moment. And for a long time, you probably bought into that. The idea of doing less, of stripping away excess, of choosing simplicity might have felt like failure or laziness or settling for less than you deserve. But when your frequency shifts, when you're actually tuning into your authentic rhythm rather than performing for invisible audiences, Simplicity stops being a compromise and starts being a relief. It's life telling you that you can live without the excess you thought you needed. You can be enough without the constant doing, acquiring, achieving, proving. You can find depth in what you already have instead of constantly seeking the next thing to fill the void. This isn't about becoming boring or giving up ambition or pretending you don't want things. It's about distinguishing between desires that come from your truth and desires that come from compensation. When you're operating from compensation, trying to fill an internal emptiness with external achievement, nothing is ever enough. When you're operating from alignment, simplicity becomes satisfying because you're not asking the external world to fix your internal state. If you're noticing this shift, if simplicity is starting to appeal to you in ways it didn't before, comment. Simplicity is clarity. Let's see who's making this transition. There's a peculiar phase in this recalibration process that catches everyone off guard, and it's this. You'll start acting differently before you fully understand why. Your behavior will shift before your mind has built a complete narrative to explain it. You'll find yourself making choices that surprise you, setting boundaries you never set before, walking away from situations your old self would have tolerated indefinitely. And your mind, which desperately wants a map, which needs to understand the terrain before it feels safe moving forward, will be scrambling to catch up with what your body and intuition already know. Life doesn't give you the map first. It moves the ground beneath your feet and then watches to see how you respond. And in that moment of instability, when everything you thought was solid suddenly feels uncertain, two very distinct impulses arise. The first is to cling to what's known, to grab on to familiar patterns even if they're suffocating you, because at least you understand them. At least you know what to expect. The second impulse is to surrender to what's true, to trust the movement even though you can't see where it's taking you, to let go of the old ground even though the new ground hasn't fully formed yet. Most people oscillate between these two impulses for years. They take a step toward the new, panic, and retreat to the old. They feel the pull of authenticity, get scared of the implications, and dive back into performance. They start to change, realize change means loss, and grip tighter to what's familiar. And this, back and forth, becomes its own kind of suffering, maybe worse than just staying stuck. Because now you know there's another possibility, but you can't quite commit to it. The breakthrough happens when you understand that your identity isn't actually what you think it is. Your identity isn't your job title, your relationship, status, your achievements, the image you project on social media, or the story you tell at dinner parties. Those are all costumes, personas, social negotiations. Your real identity, the frequency you're actually operating from, is revealed in what you do when no one is watching. It's the decision you make in private, the choice you repeat when there's no applause, no validation, no external reward. Who are you when you're completely alone? Not who you wish you were, not who you present yourself as, but who you actually are in the unwitnessed moments. Do you keep your word to yourself, or do you negotiate it away the moment it becomes inconvenient? Do you honor the boundary you set, or do you collapse it the second someone pushes back? Do you follow through on the commitment you made when you were inspired, or do you abandon it when the inspiration fades and no one is there to hold you accountable? This is where frequency becomes tangible rather than theoretical. It's not a pretty concept you adopt, not a spiritual idea you entertain. It's literally the pulse with which you move through your day, how you choose, how you speak, how you look at situations, how you respond to challenges. And that pulse is either coherent or it's fragmented. It's either aligned with your truth or it's performing for invisible audiences. The recalibration you're going through is trying to bring you into coherence, but coherence requires brutal honesty about the gap between who you think you are and who you actually are when no one's watching. That gap is where all your energy leaks. That gap is why you feel exhausted even when you're not doing that much. That gap is the dissonance that's been creating that barely off feeling we talked about earlier. Closing that gap doesn't happen through better branding or more convincing stories about yourself. It happens through the unsexy work of aligning your private actions with your stated values. It happens through doing the right thing when it doesn't benefit you socially. It happens through keeping promises to yourself that literally no other human will ever know you kept. That's the work. That's what builds a frequency that can actually sustain transformation instead of just cycling through temporary bursts of motivation. If you're ready to close that gap, if you're willing to let your private self become your real self, right, no more performing. This is where authenticity actually begins. Here's something that might surprise you. That exhaustion you've been feeling, the one you've been interpreting as weakness or burnout or a sign that something's wrong with you, that might actually be integrity trying to emerge. Because integrity, when it first shows up, doesn't arrive as moral superiority or righteous clarity. It arrives as fatigue, a deep, soul-level tiredness of living in contradiction, of maintaining half-truths, of making promises you don't keep, of tolerating your own delays and excuses. You're tired of saying, you're going to do something, and then watching yourself not do it. You're tired of presenting one version of yourself to the world while living a completely different reality in private. You're tired of relationships where real things go unsaid. You're tired of conversations that circle around truth without ever landing on it. You're tired of your own performance, your own justifications, your own ability to rationalize staying exactly where you are while claiming you want something different. And this fatigue isn't a condemnation. It's actually one of the most hopeful signs that you're done living halfway. Most people never reach this point. They stay comfortable in the compartmentalization, skilled at keeping different parts of their life separate enough that the contradictions don't rub against each other too painfully. They maintain the performance indefinitely, getting really good at managing the dissonance rather than resolving it. But you're past that now. Something in you has had enough. The recalibration has made it impossible to maintain the split, and while that feels exhausting in the moment, it's actually the precursor to becoming whole. Think about a river that's been flowing through the same narrow channel for years, maybe decades. The channel wasn't chosen because it was ideal. It was chosen because it was there, because it was known, because the river had always run that way. And for a long time, it worked well enough. The water flowed, life continued, everything functioned within the established boundaries. But then something shifts. Maybe it's a season of heavy rain, maybe it's accumulated runoff from years of small changes, maybe it's just time. Whatever the cause, the water volume increases. And suddenly, that channel that was always adequate isn't adequate anymore. The river doesn't sit down and decide to be bigger. The river doesn't have a crisis of identity about outgrowing its channel. It simply is bigger now, and the old container can no longer hold it. So what happens? The river starts seeking an exit. It touches the edges of the channel, testing for weak points, looking for overflow paths, creating pressure against the boundaries that used to contain it perfectly. From the outside, this might look chaotic, destructive even. The river is flooding areas it never touched before, disrupting established patterns, making a mess of what used to be orderly. But from the river's perspective, this isn't chaos. This is intelligence. Responding to changed conditions, the river is doing exactly what it needs to do to accommodate its new reality. And you, right now, are that river. Your capacity has increased, your awareness has expanded, your tolerance for inauthenticity has reached its limit. And the life you've been living, the identity you've been performing, the channels you've been flowing through, they're too narrow now. They can't contain who you're becoming. This is why you're feeling pressure in all these different areas of your life simultaneously. It's not that everything is falling apart. It's that everything that was barely holding you is now being tested by your expansion. The relationship that worked when you were operating at a lower frequency doesn't work anymore. The career that was acceptable when you were half asleep feels suffocating now that you're waking up. The social patterns that used to be comfortable now feel constraining. The old channel can't hold the new volume of water, and your system knows it, even if your mind is still trying to make it work. If this river metaphor is resonating, if you're recognizing yourself as water that's outgrown its channel, drop a comment. I'm seeking new ground. Let's acknowledge what's really happening here. There's a powerful story I want to share with you that illustrates exactly what this moment is asking of you. Imagine a weaver who had been creating blankets for her community for years. Her work was recognized, appreciated, sought after. She had developed a signature pattern that everyone knew, a design she could create almost unconsciously, her hands moving through the familiar motions without much thought. From every external measure, she was successful. People loved her blankets. She was good at what she did. There was nothing obviously wrong. But one winter, something shifted inside her. As she sat at her loom, repeating the same pattern she'd woven 1,000 times before, she felt something devastating. The work was leaving her empty. Her hands continued moving because they knew the pattern so well, but her heart had checked out completely. She was creating something correct, something acceptable, something that met everyone's expectations, but it wasn't true anymore. It wasn't connected to anything alive in her. And here's where most people would make a terrible mistake. They'd look at that emptiness and think they needed to burn everything down, quit weaving entirely, reject their entire craft, start something completely different. But that's not what happened. Instead, she made a choice that seemed almost absurdly small. She changed a single thread, one color, one strand, woven into the familiar pattern in a slightly different way. The change was so minimal that most people wouldn't even notice it. But she felt it immediately. The moment that new thread entered the pattern, something inside her clicked back into alignment. Her hands were doing almost the same work, but her heart was present. Again, that one thread changed everything, not because it transformed the entire blanket, but because it represented her choosing truth over autopilot. It was her saying, "I'm still here, I'm still creating, and I'm allowed to evolve even within a structure that's working." The new thread wasn't rebellion, it was reclamation. It was her taking ownership of her craft again, instead of just performing a role. This is exactly what your recalibration is asking of you right now. Not a dramatic reinvention, not a complete dismantling of everything you've built, not a spectacular transformation that makes a good story. It's asking for a new thread. One small change that represents your current truth, your actual pulse, not the version of you that existed when you first established these patterns. The mistake most people make is thinking that because the change needs to be real, it needs to be big. But size and significance aren't the same thing. A thread is tiny, almost invisible, but when it's woven with intention into the larger pattern of your life, it changes the entire texture of your experience. It's not about impressing anyone or proving anything. It's about honoring where you actually are right now instead of continuing to perform where you used to be. So here's what I want you to do. And I want you to be really specific about this. Choose one area of your life where your identity has become old, where you're still operating from a pattern that doesn't fit who you're becoming. Not 5 areas, one. And in that area, formulate a minimal decision, a single different action you're going to take starting today. Not a complete overhaul, not a massive commitment that you'll abandon in 3 days. One thread. One small, sustainable change that signals to your system, we're evolving. Maybe it's the thread of honesty. speaking one truth you've been avoiding. Maybe it's the thread of boundaries, saying no to something you would have automatically said yes to. Maybe it's the thread of presence, putting your phone away during one specific daily activity. Maybe it's the thread of care, doing one thing for your body that you've been neglecting. The specific thread doesn't matter nearly as much as the fact that you're consciously choosing to weave something new into a pattern that's been running on autopilot. If you can name your one thread right now, write it in the comments. Just the thread, nothing elaborate. Honesty, boundaries, presence, movement. Let's see what we're weaving. Now I want to address something that trips up almost everyone who starts experiencing this frequency shift, the appearance of signs. When you begin tuning into a new frequency, when your awareness expands and your autopilot starts breaking down, reality becomes what I call conversible. It's not that the universe suddenly starts sending you messages it wasn't sending before. It's that you're finally paying attention in a way that allows you to notice the patterns, the synchronicities, the seemingly meaningful coincidences that have always been there. Events start reflecting your internal state with uncomfortable clarity. The exact conversation you needed to hear happens at the exact moment you're grappling with that issue. A book falls off a shelf and opens to a page that speaks directly to your situation. Someone mentions a solution to a problem you were just thinking about, and your mind, which loves patterns and meaning, wants to turn these signs into guarantees, into proof that you're on the right path, into cosmic confirmations that everything will work out exactly as you hope. But here's where you need to be really responsible with this. A sign is not a contract. It's not salvation. It's not the universe promising you a specific outcome or protecting you from difficulty or guaranteeing success. A sign is a compass, it's orientation. It's a gentle nudge saying, pay attention here, or this direction might be worth exploring, or notice this pattern. That's it. If you start treating signs as promises, you'll either become superstitious, waiting for permission from the universe before you act, or you'll become disillusioned when things don't unfold exactly as the signs seem to suggest. Let me give you an example that makes this tangible. There was a librarian working in an old library who received a request for a rare book. He checked the catalogue, confirmed the book existed, went to the exact location where it should be, and it wasn't there. He searched thoroughly, assuming it had been misplaced. Days passed. He kept looking, kept coming up empty, and started feeling this strange frustration building inside him. But here's what kept happening. Every time he searched for this book, he kept ending up in a specific section of the library he rarely visited. A collection of anonymous personal diaries that had been donated over the years. At first, he ignored this. He was looking for a book, not diaries. But the impulse to go to that section kept arising. Finally, instead of dismissing it, he honored it. He pulled out one of the diaries and started reading. The diary was written by someone chronicling their pattern of postponement, of always delaying the essential things in favor of the urgent or comfortable things, of recognizing what they needed to do, but finding elaborate ways to avoid doing it. And as the librarian read, he felt something crack open inside him. This wasn't about the book anymore. This was about him, about his own patterns, about all the ways he'd been postponing his own essential work while staying busy with tasks that felt safer. That night, he had a dream. In the dream, he saw exactly where the lost book was, hidden behind a frame on the wall, in a space he'd never thought to check because it seemed impossible. When he woke up and went to the library, he moved the frame, and there it was. The book appeared not when he searched harder, not when he got better at his job, but when he stopped avoiding what the search was actually trying to show him. The external quest for the book was a mirror for his internal pattern of postponement. Once he faced that pattern, the book revealed itself almost effortlessly. This is how signs actually work. They don't solve your problems for you. They point you toward what you're avoiding looking at. They create opportunities for awareness, not shortcuts around the work. The librarian could have found that book eventually through systematic searching, but he would have missed the real treasure, the recognition of his own pattern and the chance to change it. If you're starting to notice reality becoming more conversible, if signs are appearing with strange frequency, write, "I'm listening differently." This marks the shift from seeking answers to recognizing patterns. The crucial thing to understand about these signs, these patterns that keep showing up in your life, is that they're not arriving to make things easier for you. They're not cosmic cushions protecting you from discomfort or difficulty. They're arriving to direct your attention toward the specific truth you need to face in order to act more effectively. They're not rescue missions. They're redirections back to your center, back to what you've been skillfully avoiding while appearing to be productively busy. Think about the librarian again. The sign wasn't the diary magically appearing to solve his problem. The sign was the repeated impulse to go to a section that seemed irrelevant to his search. The pattern was trying to show him something, but it required him to stop dismissing what didn't fit his expected solution. And this is exactly how it works in your life. The signal is always there, broadcasting clearly, but when you're out of tune, when you're operating from old frequencies, old patterns, old ways of seeing, you can't receive it properly. All you hear is noise. All you experience is confusion. When you're properly tuned, the same reality that seemed chaotic suddenly has clarity. The same circumstances that felt overwhelming suddenly have obvious next steps. Nothing external changed. Your ability to receive the signal changed. You stopped filtering everything through fear, through old stories, through the need to control outcomes, and suddenly the path that was always visible becomes clear. So here's the practical application of all this, because I don't want you leaving with just concepts. I want you to have a tool you can use immediately. When you notice a repetition in your life, when the same type of situation keeps appearing, when you keep having the same kind of conversation or encounter the same kind of obstacle or feel the same kind of resistance, there's a very specific sequence you need to follow, and you need to do this with serenity, not with judgment or frustration. First, just recognize the repetition. Don't immediately jump to fixing it or analyzing why it's happening or beating yourself up about it. Simply acknowledge, I've seen this before. This pattern is familiar. This feeling is one I know. That recognition alone, that simple act of seeing the repetition without immediately reacting to it, creates a small space of awareness that wasn't there when you were unconsciously cycling through the pattern. Second, and this is where most people skip a critical step, locate where you're feeling this repetition in your body right now. Not where you think you should feel it, not where it makes logical sense to feel it, but where you actually feel it. Is there tightness in your chest, a knot in your throat, heaviness in your stomach, tension across your back? Your body is holding information about this pattern that your mind doesn't have access to yet. The physical sensation is trying to communicate something specific, and if you bypass it to stay in your head, you miss half the message. Third, and this is the question that changes everything, ask yourself with genuine curiosity and, without self-judgment, what decision am I avoiding? Not what's wrong with me, not why does this keep happening, not how do I make it stop, but what decision, what choice, what action have I been systematically avoiding that this repetition is trying to surface? Because I promise you, the pattern isn't random. It's not bad luck. It's not the universe punishing you. It's your life trying to get your attention about a choice you need to make, but haven't been willing to face. Maybe it's the decision to leave a situation that's slowly draining you. Maybe it's the decision to finally have a conversation you've been postponing for months. Maybe it's the decision to stop waiting for perfect conditions and start with what you have right now. Maybe it's the decision to admit you don't actually want what you've been telling everyone you want. Whatever it is, the repetition will continue until you face the decision it's pointing toward. If you're recognizing a repetition right now, if you can feel it in your body as I'm saying this, write in the comments, I see my pattern. No explanation needed, just that acknowledgement. Now let me tell you about a type of silence that most people never experience because they're terrified of it. This isn't the silence of an empty room or a quiet moment. This is silence as presence of direction. It's not the absence of external sound, it's the sudden drop in internal noise that happens when something finally clicks into place inside you. And the strange thing is, this silence can happen anywhere. You could be in the middle of a crowded street, in the middle of an intense conversation, in the middle of typing a message, and suddenly the static in your mind drops a level, and you just know. You know what needs to happen. You know what the truth is. You know what decision you've been avoiding. This is the silence that decides, and it's completely different from the paralysis that masquerades as thoughtful contemplation. When you're stuck, your mind is loud, churning through options, rehearsing scenarios, building cases for and against every possibility. But when this clarifying silence arrives, all that noise evaporates, and what remains is simply obvious. Not comfortable necessarily, not easy, but obvious. This is what people are actually talking about when they mention following their intuition, though that phrase has been so overused it's lost its precision. The challenge is that you can't force this silence. You can't manufacture it. Through meditation apps or breathing exercises, though those things can create conditions that make it more likely. This silence arrives when you finally stop trying to think your way to the answer and allow something deeper to surface. It arrives when you quit negotiating with yourself, when you release the grip of control, just enough for truth to slip through. There's a story that demonstrates this perfectly. A woman who made her living repairing lighthouses understood something most people miss. Systems don't fail all at once. They fail through accumulation of small, ignored distractions. A tiny issue here, a minor misalignment there, something barely noticeable that you tell yourself you'll address later. And then one day the whole system starts behaving erratically, and you can't figure out why, because you've been looking in all the obvious places. One night she was called to a lighthouse where the light was flickering. Not going out completely, just flickering in a way that could be dangerous for ships navigating nearby waters. She checked all the standard points of failure, fuel levels, mechanical connections, the rotation mechanism, everything you'd normally examine. All appeared fine. The lighthouse keeper was frustrated, insisting something was definitely wrong, and she believed him. But the obvious culprits weren't revealing themselves. So she did something that seems counterintuitive when you're trying to solve a problem. She stopped. She sat down in the lighthouse, turned off her analytical mind, and just listened, not with her ears primarily, though that was part of it. She listened with her whole awareness, letting go of her assumptions about where the problem should be and opening to where it actually was. And in that silence, in that suspension of effort, she heard it, a tiny click, irregular, almost imperceptible. A sound she would have completely missed if she'd kept operating from the noise of trying to fix things. She followed that sound to a place no one would normally check, a small adjustment mechanism hidden behind the main assembly. There was a gear that had shifted microscopically out of alignment, not broken, not obviously damaged, just barely off in a way that created an irregular pattern. She made a minimal correction, and the flickering stopped immediately. The problem wasn't in the dramatic, visible systems. It was in the hidden detail that only revealed itself when she got quiet enough to notice. This is exactly what's required of you right now. The answer you're seeking, the clarity you need, the next right step. It's probably not where you keep looking. It's not in more information, more analysis, more opinions from others, more content consumption. It's in the silence that allows you to hear the irregular click, the subtle wrongness, the thing that's barely off, but creating all the downstream chaos. If you're ready to stop and listen, if you're willing to get quiet enough to hear what effort has been covering Right, I'm getting quiet. This is where real discovery begins. What most people misunderstand about this frequency shift is that rising higher doesn't mean pushing harder. In fact, the opposite is often true. When your frequency rises, when you're operating from a more aligned state, your decisions require a completely different type of listening. The old approach was to analyze every angle, gather more data, apply more mental force, figure it out through sheer cognitive effort. But that approach stops working at a certain level of awareness because the answers you need aren't accessible through that pathway. Sometimes the most effective thing you can do is exactly what feels least productive. Sit down, stop trying to control the outcome, and allow the true detail to reveal itself. This isn't passive resignation or giving up. This is active receptivity. It's recognizing that the information you need is already present, but hidden beneath the noise of your frantic attempts to force a solution. Silence decides, because it returns what haste systematically hides. When you're rushing, when you're anxious, when you're gripping tightly to a specific outcome, you create so much internal turbulence that the subtle signals can't get through. Think about the lighthouse keeper. She could have kept checking the same obvious systems over and over, applying more effort, bringing in more tools, working harder and longer. But none of that would have revealed the hidden misalignment. The solution came when she released the gesture of control, got quiet, and listened for what was actually there, rather than what she expected to find. And this principle applies to everything you're facing right now. That relationship issue you keep trying to solve through more communication. The answer might arrive when you stop talking and start listening differently. That career decision you keep analyzing to death. The clarity might emerge when you stop gathering more information and tune into what you already know. Now here's where we need to talk about discipline, because that word probably makes you tense up a little. For most of us, discipline has been weaponized. It arrives with the energy of harshness, punishment, forcing yourself to do things you don't want to do through sheer willpower. It's the drill sergeant in your head yelling at you to get up earlier, work harder, stop being lazy. And while that kind of discipline might produce short-term results, it's completely unsustainable for the kind of transformation we're talking about. You can't hate yourself into a higher frequency. You can't bully yourself into alignment. The discipline that actually transforms doesn't hit, it accompanies. It walks beside you with patience, not demanding that you become a completely different person overnight, but asking you to become consistent in small ways. It's gentle, not because it lacks standards, but because it understands how change actually works in human nervous systems. You don't rise through momentary bursts of intense effort, followed by collapse and self-recrimination. You rise through conscious repetition of aligned actions, through showing up again and again, through honoring your commitments to yourself, even when, especially when, no one else is watching. This is the kind of discipline that doesn't burn you out. It's the kind that builds trust between you and yourself, which is the foundation of everything else. Every time you do what you said you would do, even in a small way, even when it's not convenient, you're making a deposit in your internal bank of self-trust. And that trust accumulates. It becomes the bedrock that allows you to take bigger risks, make harder choices, maintain boundaries, pursue paths that don't have guaranteed outcomes. Gentle discipline means you don't wait until you feel motivated. You don't wait until conditions are perfect. You don't wait until you've resolved all your doubts and fears. You show up to the practice, to the commitment, to the one thread you chose to weave into your pattern, with the understanding that consistency matters more than intensity. 10 minutes every day will transform you more reliably than 3 hours once a month, followed by weeks of nothing. If you're ready to practice gentle discipline instead of harsh force, if you're willing to accompany yourself with patience, write in the comments, gentle and consistent. Let me see who's making this shift. There's a perfect story that brings this gentle discipline into sharp focus. In a valley where the weather was unpredictable and the wind could change direction without any warning, there lived a gardener who cultivated medicinal herbs. His garden wasn't the largest or the most impressive from a distance, but people who knew plants would notice something remarkable. His herbs were unusually vigorous, even in difficult seasons when other gardens struggled. When visitors asked him what his secret was, expecting some special technique or rare knowledge, he gave the simplest answer imaginable. "I visit them every day." People would laugh, thinking he was being modest or withholding the real secret. "We all check on our gardens," they'd say. But he would shake his head gently. "No, you look at your gardens when you feel like it, when you remember, when it's convenient. I visit mine every day, not because I force myself, but because I listen." That distinction is everything. He wasn't performing a duty or checking a box. He was in relationship with his garden. Some days he would water, some days he would simply observe. Some days he would adjust the shade, move a plant, remove a damaged leaf. The specific action varied, but the presence was constant. And that constancy created an intelligence in his garden that couldn't be replicated by sporadic bursts of intense effort. When drought came to the valley, this is where the real teaching revealed itself. Other gardeners panicked. Some overwatered out of fear, drowning their plants' roots. Others gave up entirely, deciding it was a lost season, but this gardener simply maintained his daily visits. He didn't amplify the drama of the situation. He didn't catastrophize or despair. He increased his presence, not his anxiety. He watered less frequently because the conditions demanded it, but when he watered, he did it with precision, making every drop count. Someone watching him during this time asked why he wasn't more worried, why he wasn't doing more to fight the drought. And his response cuts through so much of how people approach difficulty. "I don't fight the season, I accompany the cycle." Think about what that means. He wasn't pretending the drought didn't exist. He wasn't in denial about the challenge, but he also wasn't wasting energy resisting reality or demanding that conditions be different than they were. He was working with what was actually present, adapting his care to the actual circumstances, staying in relationship with the process rather than abandoning it because it got hard. This is gentle discipline in action. This is what it looks like to accompany yourself through different seasons of your life without abandoning the direction you've chosen. You're going to have drought periods. There will be times when your energy is low, when external circumstances are difficult, when nothing seems to be growing despite your efforts. And in those moments, the temptation is to either force things, to overwater, metaphorically speaking, to push harder, to compensate through intensity, or to abandon the practice entirely until conditions improve. But gentle discipline asks something different of you. It asks you to maintain the visit even when you don't feel like it, even when the results aren't visible, even when the season is harsh. Not to torture yourself, not to prove how strong you are, but to stay in relationship with your own growth. The daily visit to your practice, to your commitment, to the one thread you're weaving, that's what creates the conditions for transformation, regardless of what season you're in. And here's what people miss. The gardener's plants survived the drought better than others, not because he did more, but because he stayed present. His consistency had built resilience into the system. The daily attention, the regular care, the accumulated relationship that created a foundation strong enough to weather difficult conditions. If you're in a difficult season right now and you're tempted to abandon your practice until things get easier, right, I'm staying present. That's the commitment that changes everything. So let's bring this down to today, to this actual moment you're living in right now. Gentle discipline doesn't negotiate endlessly with itself. It doesn't spend an hour debating whether conditions are right, or if you're feeling motivated enough, or if this is the perfect time. It simply chooses the smallest, possible evidence and acts on it. And I mean small, so small that your mind can't build an elaborate case against it, so brief that completion is nearly inevitable, so concrete that there's no ambiguity about whether you did it or not. This is where most people sabotage themselves. Their mind immediately wants to complicate things, to make the action more impressive, to turn a simple gesture into a grand production. You decide you're going to drink water with attention, and suddenly your mind is designing an entire hydration protocol with specific ounces at specific times, and researching the optimal water temperature. Stop. Return to simple. Gentle discipline doesn't debate the perfect approach. It takes the obvious action that's available right now. One breath taken consciously, 1 minute of movement, one surface cleared, one honest sentence spoken, one boundary held, one commitment kept. That's your evidence. Not evidence for anyone else, not something to post about or receive. Validation for, evidence for your own nervous system that you are who you say you are. That gap we talked about earlier, between who you think you are and who you actually are when no one's watching. This is how you close it. Through small, undeniable acts of integrity that accumulate into a completely different frequency. Now, I need to address something that's probably happening as you start to actually implement any of this. You're going to feel uncomfortable. Not maybe uncomfortable, definitely uncomfortable. And your first instinct will be to interpret that discomfort as a sign that something's wrong, that you're making a mistake, that you should retreat back to what's familiar. But here's what you need to understand with absolute clarity. Not everything uncomfortable is a sign you're heading in the wrong direction. Sometimes, probably most of the time when you're genuinely growing, discomfort is exactly the sign that you're entering territory you've never entered before. You're pushing against the edges of your known world, and those edges don't just politely open for you. They resist. There's friction, and that friction, if you learn to read it responsibly instead of just reacting to it, isn't punishment or evidence of failure. It's growth speaking in a quiet voice that most people never learn to hear because they run the moment things stop feeling comfortable. Life doesn't always open smoothly. In fact, it rarely does. Think about any significant transition you've made, changing careers, ending a relationship, moving to a new city, starting a creative project. The beginning was probably clunky and awkward and filled with moments where you questioned whether you'd made the right choice. That's not because you chose wrong. That's because you're learning a new way of being, and learning always involves a period of incompetence before competence emerges. The mistake is interpreting the friction as failure. You start exercising after years of being sedentary, and your body aches. That's not your body telling you to stop. That's your body adapting to new demands. You start speaking your truth after years of people-pleasing, and people react with surprise or resistance. That's not evidence you should go back to silence. That's the system adjusting to your new boundaries. You commit to a daily practice, and the first week feels forced and unnatural. That's not a sign the practice is wrong for you. That's what it feels like to build a new neural pathway. There is a difference, though, between healthy discomfort and destructive pain, and you need to develop discernment here. Healthy discomfort has a quality of expansion to it, even if it's scary. It feels like you're stretching, like you're becoming more rather than less. Destructive pain has a quality of contraction. It makes you smaller, dimmer, more fearful. One asks you to breathe into it and stay present. The other asks you to reassess and possibly change course. If you're experiencing friction right now as you attempt to shift your frequency, growing through friction, this is how we normalize the actual process instead of the fantasy. Let me share a story that perfectly illustrates what it actually feels like to move through this kind of healthy discomfort. In a remote mountain region, there was an old suspended bridge connecting two villages. It wasn't a modern, stable structure. It was made of worn wooden planks and frayed rope, and it creaked with every step. The bridge didn't fall, it was technically safe, But crossing it required you to override every survival instinct, screaming that you were about to plunge to your death. A young man needed to cross this bridge to deliver medicine to someone on the other side. It wasn't optional. It wasn't something he could postpone until he felt braver. The need was immediate. So he approached the bridge, and the moment he stepped onto the first plank, the entire structure swayed. His mind immediately began narrating every possible tragedy, the rope snapping, the wood splintering, his body falling. The fear was absolutely real, completely rational given the circumstances. But here's what he did that changed everything. He didn't wait for the fear to disappear. He didn't try to convince himself the bridge was safer than it looked. He didn't psych himself up with affirmations about being brave. He simply took one step, and when his mind started screaming again, catastrophizing the next disaster, he brought his attention back to his feet. He felt the plank beneath him. He noticed his balance. He took another step. The bridge kept creaking. His mind kept generating worst-case scenarios, but he stayed with the immediate physical reality of each step, rather than the imagined horrors his mind was producing. He didn't cross that bridge without fear. He crossed it with fear and with presence. And that combination, acknowledging the fear while maintaining presence with what's actually happening, rather than what might happen, that's the skill that allows you to move through the friction of growth instead of being stopped by it. By the time he reached the other side, he hadn't conquered fear. He'd learned that he could move forward even while feeling it, and that's infinitely more valuable. Now let's talk about something that has more power over your transformation than almost anything else, something so fundamental that most people never examine it. The language you use to describe your experience. There are moments in this recalibration process where you don't actually need to change your entire life. You need to change how you name what's happening. Because language isn't neutral description. Language is direction. The words you use, both out loud to others and silently to yourself, are an invisible hand constantly adjusting your frequency. When you say I'm struggling, you create a different internal state than when you say I'm learning. When you say I'm stuck, you generate different possibilities than when you say I'm choosing. When you label a difficult conversation as conflict, you approach it differently than if you label it as clarification. Same external situation, completely different frequency based solely on how you're framing it linguistically. And here's what makes this so powerful. When your frequency adjusts through language, your decisions automatically change. You don't have to force different choices. Different choices become obvious. Because you're operating from a different narrative about what's happening. If you're telling yourself, I never follow through, you're creating an identity that makes not following through almost inevitable. If you shift that to, I'm building consistency, you've opened space for a different pattern to emerge. This isn't about positive thinking or pretending things are fine when they're not. This is about accurate naming versus distorted naming. Most of the language people use about themselves is wildly inaccurate, skewed toward the negative, reinforcing limitation rather than possibility. If you're ready to examine and shift the language you use about yourself and your situation, write in the comments one word you're going to stop using. Just one. Can't. Always. Never. Stuck. Whatever word is keeping you locked in an old frequency. There's another story that perfectly captures what we're talking about with this language shift and frequency adjustment. A man spent his life repairing old radios, the kind that required manual tuning to find stations. People would bring him radios that produced nothing but static, convinced the equipment was broken, ready to throw them away. And what he discovered, time and time again, was that the radio wasn't broken at all. The signal was broadcasting clearly. What was broken was the tuning. He would take these radios that seemed completely dead, turn the dial by barely 1 degree, a movement so subtle you could barely see his hand. move, and suddenly a voice would come through. Music would emerge from what seemed like pure noise. The signal had been there the entire time, broadcasting at full strength. The problem was never the signal. The problem was that the receiver was positioned just slightly off frequency, and that tiny misalignment meant the person only heard static, chaos, confusion. He would explain this to his customers with remarkable patience. The signal was always there. What was off was the tuning. And when you're off, you only hear noise. Think about how this applies to your life right now. You're surrounded by signals, by guidance, by next steps, by clarity that's broadcasting constantly. But if your internal receiver is tuned to the wrong frequency, tuned to fear, to old stories, to limiting beliefs, to the language of impossibility, all you're going to receive is static. All you're going to experience is confusion and overwhelm. The recalibration you're going through is adjusting that dial. And, just like the radio repairman's tiny turn, the adjustment doesn't need to be dramatic. Changing one word in how you describe yourself, shifting one phrase you repeat internally, reframing one situation from a different linguistic angle. These microscopic turns can suddenly bring in a clear signal where before there was only noise. But here's what I need you to understand about these adjustments, about these small truths that actually change your daily experience. They don't arrive as grand revelations. They're not going to show up with trumpet fanfares and obvious importance. The truths that actually shift your frequency arrive small, almost apologetically, like whispers you could easily miss if you're waiting for something more impressive. It might be a simple phrase that drops into your mind while you're washing a glass, something so quiet you almost dismiss it. It might be an internal gesture of recognition when you notice fatigue the moment you agree to something you don't actually want to do. It might be a sudden clarity while you're stuck in traffic that has nothing to do with traffic. These small truths seem humble, almost insignificant, easy to overlook in favor of seeking bigger insights or more dramatic breakthroughs. But they have enormous power precisely because they're small enough to actually implement. Big revelations are inspiring but often paralyzing. You have this massive realization about your entire life, and then you don't know where to start. So, you start nowhere. Small truths give you immediate, actionable next steps. They don't ask you to overhaul everything. They ask you to shift one thing right now, and that one thing, when honored, creates a cascade of changes that ripple through your entire system. The small truth might be as simple as, I don't want to go to this event. Not a philosophical treatise on authenticity, not a complete analysis of your social patterns, just that one clear sentence. And if you honor it, if you actually say no instead of overriding that truth with obligation or guilt, you've just adjusted your tuning by 1 degree. The signal gets clearer. The next small truth becomes easier to hear. If you've been dismissing small truths because you're waiting for bigger ones, right? Small is powerful. This is where real transformation actually lives. There's a precision to transformation that most people never discover because they're looking for the wrong thing. They're searching for the massive breakthrough, the one big change that will fix everything, when what they actually need is to find the small gear that's creating all the downstream chaos. Let me tell you about a clockmaker who understood this better than anyone. Someone brought him a clock that was losing time, not dramatically, just consistently. Every day it would fall behind by the same small margin, not enough to make you late for anything important, but enough to be noticeable, enough to be annoying. The clockmaker examined the entire mechanism, looking for obvious problems. Broken parts, missing pieces, clear damage. He found none. Everything looked fine, but the clock was still off. What he discovered was remarkable in its simplicity. One tiny gear, buried deep in the mechanism, was rubbing against another component. Not grinding, not broken, just barely touching in a way it shouldn't. That micro-friction was creating just enough resistance to slow the entire system down by those few minutes every day. He made an adjustment so small you could barely see it, realigning that one gear by a fraction, and suddenly the clock kept perfect time. He said something then that applies to everything we've been talking about. Little things don't fix the day, they define it. A minute seems like nothing until it repeats. Chaos isn't always big, dramatic, obvious. Sometimes it's a small friction you sustain every day without realizing it's there. This is what's happening in your life right now. You're not dealing with catastrophic failure. You're dealing with accumulated friction from small misalignments you've been tolerating, compensating for, working around instead of addressing. Maybe it's the friction of saying yes when you mean no, repeated daily until you've built an entire life of obligations you resent. Maybe it's the friction of checking your phone first thing every morning, fragmenting your attention before the day even begins, repeated until you can't focus on anything for more than minutes at a time. Maybe it's the friction of harsh self-talk, that internal voice that criticizes and diminishes you, repeated so often you don't even notice it's running constantly in the background. Each instance seems small, manageable, not worth making a fuss over. But repetition transforms the trivial into the defining. That 1 minute of delay, multiplied across days and weeks and months, adds up to hours of your life running behind where it could be. That one small gear, left misaligned, eventually wears down the entire mechanism, and those small frictions in how you're living, left unaddressed, eventually create the exhaustion, the confusion, the sense that something's fundamentally off, even though you can't point to any single catastrophic problem. Now let's talk about the most sophisticated form of self-sabotage I see, the one that disguises itself as wisdom and maturity, sacred postponement. This isn't the obvious procrastination where you know you're avoiding something and you feel guilty about it. This is postponement dressed in spiritual language, wrapped in the appearance of being thoughtful, cautious, aligned. It's waiting for the perfect sign, the ideal internal state, the moment of absolute certainty before you'll allow yourself to move forward. It sounds like prudence. It feels like you're being responsible, making sure you're truly ready, not rushing into things. But what it actually is, most of the time, is fear wearing elegant clothing. It's pain, disguised as not yet. It's perfectionism masquerading as proper preparation, and it keeps you stuck in a way that's almost impossible to challenge because you've convinced yourself that waiting is the wise choice, that you're honoring your journey by not forcing anything. But life doesn't owe you a moment without trembling. It doesn't owe you perfect clarity before asking you to move. It doesn't owe you the complete elimination of fear before expecting you to act. And if you're waiting for those conditions, you'll wait forever, because transformation doesn't work that way. Life changes with the first gesture, repeated, not with the fantasy of what you'll do when conditions are perfect. With the imperfect action you take today, again tomorrow, and the day after that. If you recognize sacred postponement in yourself, if you've been waiting for some external permission to finally start, write, "I'm done waiting." This is where movement actually begins. So here we are, at the end of this conversation that was never really about a book appearing when you're about to awaken. It was about you recognizing that the awakening is already happening, that the recalibration isn't something waiting in your future. It's the pause you're experiencing right now, the exhaustion that's actually integrity emerging, the friction that's teaching you where you've outgrown your old channels. If you made it all the way here, if you stayed present through this entire journey, that itself is evidence. You didn't get distracted, didn't click away to something easier or more entertaining. You stayed because something in you recognized the signal through the noise. And that recognition matters more than you might realize. I create content like this because I believe there are people who are ready for truth that doesn't come wrapped in hype or false promises, people who understand that real transformation is humble, repetitive, and profoundly simple. If that's you, if this resonated at a level that goes beyond just finding the video interesting, then subscribe to this channel, not to collect content you'll never watch again, but because you're committing to staying in this conversation, to continuing this recalibration with consistency instead of intensity. And if you want to mark this moment, if you want to acknowledge to yourself that you were present for this entire message, write in the comments, "This message was meant for me." Let that be your small gesture, your evidence for today that you're no longer postponing your own awakening. Hit the like button if this shifted something in you, even slightly. That small action helps this reach other people who are in their own pause, looking for language that makes sense of what they're experiencing. And listen, there's another video right here that goes even deeper into how to actually implement this frequency shift in your daily life without the spiritual bypass or the self-help fantasy. Click on it and continue with me there, because what we started here isn't finished. The recalibration continues, one small